I was supposed to be at work that morning, pretending I was fine after losing my father. Instead, I was standing outside a storage warehouse with my brother, my sister, and a lawyer, about to hear the last thing Dad ever left us. He hadn't left a house. He hadn't left money. He had left a locked storage unit full of boxes everyone else called junk. But to me it felt like one last conversation with the man who always spoke to me through small things. My brother rolled his eyes. My sister laughed. Then the lawyer opened the will and read the line that changed everything. Find the 3 missing records within 72 hours, and the estate is yours. That was the moment I realized my father had not left us a mess. He had left us a message. My name is Ben Caldwell. In my family, I was the quiet one. Marcus was the one who could walk into a room and make people listen. Helena was the one who could turn one sentence into a speech. I was the son who noticed when a cabinet was slightly open, when a bill was paid twice, or when my father went silent for just a second too long. When I was a kid, Dad used to sit with me at the kitchen table and sort old papers into neat little stacks. Sometimes he'd hum under his breath while he worked. Sometimes he'd slide me the warm side of his mug and tell me not to rush the things that matter. He told me the people who notice small things are usually the ones who save everybody else. Back then, I thought he was just being kind. Standing in that warehouse, I understood he had been training me for something none of us saw coming. And maybe that was the part that hurt the most. He had always known me better than I knew myself. He had always made room for the quiet version of me. The lawyer opened a second envelope and listed the contents of the storage unit. The black ledger, the reservoir tape, the glass map, 3 records, 3 clues, 72 hours. No outside help after the deadline. If nobody found them, the archive would be sealed for 25 years. Marcus immediately called in helpers. Helena brought in archivists. I just stood there looking at the boxes because the whole thing felt too deliberate to be random. My father never wasted a label. He never wasted a test. If he built this puzzle, it meant he believed one of us could solve it. Maybe more than that. Maybe he believed I could. By the end of the first day, the storage unit looked less like a room and more like a battlefield. Marcus had scanners, laptops, and people moving too fast. Helena had stacks of files sorted into perfect rows. They were both doing what they always did, making noise. I kept circling the boxes, reading the labels, and noticing the tiny pencil marks my father used when he didn't want anyone else to understand what they were seeing. C1R, C2L, C3M. At first they looked random. Then I remembered the way Dad used to talk about butterflies. He said the ones that survive are the ones that change without losing themselves. He called his filing system the chrysalis method. Suddenly the clutter wasn't clutter. It was a code. And once I saw that, I knew the whole room was speaking. The black ledger wasn't in a box labeled ledger. Of course it wasn't. It was hidden inside a folder called picnic photos. The code on the corner said C2L, scientific fraud, ledger. Inside were payment records from NextGene Aqua Group. Names, dates, transfers. All of them landing right before towns reported contaminated water. My hands started shaking because the ledger wasn't just paperwork. It was proof that people had been paid to delay reports, change test results, and tell families the water was safe when it wasn't. That was the moment this stopped being about inheritance. It became about the people who had never been given the truth. And suddenly I understood why Dad hid it where nobody would look. He wasn't collecting gossip. He was protecting strangers. And that made me love him a little more, even while I was angry that he had been carrying this alone. Marcus saw my face and walked straight over. What did you find? I closed the folder before he could look. He gave me the same smile he always used when he thought he had already won. Ben, don't do this. You don't know what you're holding. For a second, the old version of me almost handed it over. That was the role I had played for years. The quiet one. The backup. The son everyone assumed would be grateful for leftovers. But I thought about my father telling me that small observations save people. So I looked Marcus in the eye and said, "Then keep searching." And for the first time, I did not feel small when I walked away. I felt steady, like my father was still beside me, nodding once, the way he used to when I got something right. The second record was harder. Hundreds of tapes sat in the back of the unit. Family trips, birthdays, old home videos. Things that looked harmless until you understood how my father hid his real life in plain sight. Then I found a VHS case marked Lake Trip 2004. It was the kind of tape Dad kept because he believed ordinary family memories mattered as much as the big ones. In the corner, almost rubbed off, was the code. C3T. I found an old player, plugged it in, and pressed play. Static. Then voices. Someone said Reservoir 7 had tested positive 6 months before the public was told. Another voice said Next Gene would lose contracts if the truth came out. Then my father's voice cut through the noise. Tired. Quiet. Steady. If anything happens to me, make sure Ben gets this. I just stood there, because hearing him say my name made the room feel warmer and colder at the same time. It felt like he was still in the room, close enough to answer if I whispered. Turned the whole search into a warning. The third record should have been the easiest. It wasn't. The glass map had no obvious label, no easy code, nothing sitting on the surface. I searched C1M, C2M, C3M, nothing. Hours kept slipping away. My eyes hurt. Marcus was getting angry. Helena looked exhausted. And then I remembered what Dad always said when I tried too hard to solve one of his games. Some truths only show themselves when you stop forcing them. I took his old notebooks to a lamp and held the pages against the light. First it looked blank. Then, slowly, a code appeared through the paper. C3M. Environmental Exploitation. Map. The glass map was never hidden in a box. It was hidden in the light. The map showed 23 towns. At first they looked unrelated. Different states. Different counties. Different water systems. But when I matched them to the ledger, the pattern turned ugly. Next Gene had quietly bought emergency water rights in every one of those places before the contamination reports became public. They weren't just covering up disasters. They were making money from them. That was the part that made my stomach drop. My father had not spent years collecting gossip. He had spent years trying to protect strangers who would never know his name. And at the bottom of one page, beside one town, he'd written a note that made the whole room go silent. If I die before the hearing, ask why the boat was already unlocked. My father had died in a boating accident. At least that's what we were told. After reading that line, it didn't feel like an accident anymore. It felt like a question somebody was afraid to answer. By the time the 72 hours ended, I was carrying 3 records and a lot more fear than I wanted to admit. The lawyer asked us to present what we found. Marcus had stacks of scans. Helena had organized binders. Neither of them had the actual truth. I placed the ledger, the tape, and the map on the table. The room went quiet. Then the lawyer opened a second envelope. Inside was a single sentence from my father. If you found these, then you understand the system. Now finish the investigation. That was when I finally understood the will. It was never about inheritance. It was about trust. My father had not chosen the loudest child. He had chosen the one who listened. And for the first time in my life, I felt what that trust was supposed to feel like. Not pressure. Not a test. Just a quiet kind of love that had been there all along. The woman at the head of Next Gene was Clara Voss. Polished. Careful. The kind of person who smiled like a locked door. I went to a public water policy conference with a recorder in my pocket and my father's notes in my bag. I introduced myself as the son of a dead professor and watched her underestimate me instantly. That was her mistake. I mentioned Reservoir 7. Her smile changed. I asked about the payments in the ledger. She leaned closer and said, "You have no idea what your father was interfering with." I said, "I know enough to know you were counting on him staying quiet." That was the first time her voice slipped. Not a confession, but close enough. And when the recording went public later that week, the room that used to make me feel small finally had to hear me. The fallout hit fast. Journalists published the ledger. Regulators reopened the cases. Whistleblowers started coming forward. Within weeks, Next Gene executives were being questioned. Clara Voss resigned. Then she was indicted. The company was forced to pay billions in damages to the towns it had poisoned and lied to. Marcus called me after the first wave of headlines. For once, he didn't sound superior. He just said, "I was wrong about you." Helena apologized too. And this time, it didn't feel like they were trying to win something. Felt real. I didn't need them to worship me. I just needed them to see me. That was enough to change the family. 2 months later, I turned my father's archive into a public truth center. Every document was scanned. Every tape was preserved. Every map was copied. But I kept the original filing system exactly the way he designed it. The chrysalis method. Because the world had called him paranoid. My siblings had called him impossible. And I had spent most of my life thinking I was just the quiet one in the background. But Dad had known better. He had seen the one thing the rest of the family kept missing. I could remember the little details, the labels, the pencil marks, the things nobody else bothered to open, the things he trusted me with because he knew I'd care. So now, whenever someone asks why I still keep one folder labeled picnic photos on my desk, I tell them the truth. Because my father taught me that love does not always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a label nobody else bothers to open. And sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the only one who notices what matters. That was his gift to me, and it turned out to be the one thing that saved us all. It still feels like the most loving thing anyone ever gave me. And when I open that folder now, I don't see junk. I see my father leaving me one last quiet instruction. Keep listening.